Hello everyone and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And to conclude today's show, we're going to be previewing a CFP first round matchup that is perhaps the most intriguing on the docket. It's the 8-9 match between Tennessee and Ohio State at the Horseshoe. Very well could have been a home game at Neyland Stadium for Tennessee because Ohio State did have that very detrimental loss in terms of their loss to Michigan at home, but ultimately it is still at Ohio Stadium, so that is why ultimately they are the favorite in this one. Looking at the betting perspective at 7.5, over under 47.5, Ohio State minus 280 to win, Tennessee plus 250 to win. And I think the reason why a lot of people are high on Ohio State in this one is A, the home field advantage, and B, the more well-rounded team. Because when I look at Tennessee, and we'll start off by talking about their chance in this game, I think about an offense that at times gets a little bit too one-dimensional and certainly feels like it's over-reliant on Dylan Sampson, who granted is one of the more underrated running backs in the country when it comes to that position, but ultimately can't be ground into submission time and time again, because of the fact that you need balance there. And we know what this Tennessee offense can be when Nico Iamaleava, their young freshman quarterback, sorry, I was thinking about the NFL there for a second. Their young freshman quarterback does sling the rock. He can make explosive plays happen down the field. He is capable of that, but it hasn't come against elite competition. When you look at Ohio State on the other side, they have one of the elite defenses in college football. In fact, a lot of people believe it is the number one defense statistically, at the very least, in terms of overall play. So when I think about what Tennessee has to do offensively, right, it's get the ball out of Nico's hands quickly when he is throwing the football and try and get Dylan Sampson going on latter downs rather than early downs. Because when I think about it, you have to set a certain tone against this Ohio State defense. And while Michigan did it with running, you don't want that to be your MO the entirety of the game. Because you do have chances, if you're Tennessee, to truly develop a rhythmic performance on the offensive side of the football if you trust Nico. And I feel like Josh Heupel in certain moments throughout the season hasn't trusted Nico in the biggest moments. And that's what's led to Tennessee's detriment. That's what's led to questions surrounding this team. And I feel like, if Dylan Sampson is on his game, they do have a chance. Especially, if they can sustain drives. But I don't want to get too over-reliant in certain situations to the point where they feel that Dylan Sampson can win the game single-handedly, because that's not going to happen. Because as much as Ohio State has struggled with opponent running attacks at certain moments, it's still not necessarily something that I feel will really hurt them if their offense gets going. Let's talk about that matchup here, because that matchup is the more intriguing one. Ohio State's offense against Tennessee's defense. Let's talk about Tennessee's defense for a little bit here. This is also no slouch of a defense with one of the best defensive players and prospects in the 2025 NFL Draft, from James Pierce, coming off the edge. And so I do feel like that's where Tennessee could find an advantage here, at least in terms of ways they can try and win this football game. If you generate pressure on an OSU offensive line that for the most part has been banged up all year long, yes, they've gotten key players like Tate Ratledge back, but they have still shifted so many times that there haven't necessarily been a continuity that you would like from a CFP line. I feel like Tennessee can get to a guy in Will Howard who I'm going to be looking at very closely in this matchup, because I do feel like the best parts of Tennessee come from quenching drives at the point of attack rather than, trying to defend in the back end, because I do think that's where Ohio State also has an overwhelming advantage. I do think that you have a chance to really confuse Will Howard in certain moments. So that's going to be an point of emphasis for Tennessee in this one that I'm going to be watching, because knowing Will Howard from my time as a Big 12 fan, particularly as a Texas fan when he was still there, watching him at Kansas State, one of the big issues with him in his career is the big mistake. And we saw it this season in their biggest game against Oregon, when he slid when he knew there was very little time left and ultimately it ran up the clock. So we know that he's capable of really elevating this attack, really letting it breathe in certain moments when he has to, but he's also capable of making the mistake that could eliminate them from the CFP and ultimately, potentially, fire Ryan Day as well. Let's talk about that storyline a little bit. I wasn't expecting to talk about that storyline as much, but let's be clear here. There are 3 goals as an Ohio State football coach: beat Michigan, qualify for the CFP, and win the national championship. Ryan Day has failed in every single season here, except one, I believe, his first year when they beat Michigan. I'm not necessarily sure of those facts, but he has failed for the most part in more ways than one in that regard over these past couple of years of his tenure. So I do believe that if they don't win this game or don't make a deep run, avenge their loss to Oregon potentially, Ryan Day's out the door. And I feel like, that's going to be lingering a lot in the back of some players' minds here. Because I do feel like Ryan Day is a solid coach. He has developed a lot of players, but a lot of what he's done has been through the portal. I don't necessarily know if Ohio State fails to either win a CFP game or win the entire thing, that a lot of these players will be satisfied with their careers at Ohio State. A lot of these players might abandon ship next year. And so I'm going to be looking at that storyline as well and how it affects certain players for Ohio State in this one as well. Because let's talk about Ohio State here. Obviously, when you look at them on paper, they are the most talented team in the country, on both sides of the football for that matter. You have opponent defense at all 3 levels. You have JT Tuimoloau leading the front. You have Caleb Downs, the transfer from Alabama, in the back end. On offense, you have perhaps one of the best assemblages of talent Ohio State has ever seen at the wide receiver position. And I know that's kind of lofty in terms of who they've had over the past couple of years in terms of JSN and Marvin Harrison Jr. But when you look at Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, players like that, these are all players outside of Emeka Egbuka, who's going to be a very high draft pick this year, who are going to be the future and faces of Ohio State for the next 3 or so years. And so that's why I feel like Ohio State has to try and get them going in this one, because they could be the difference here for this Ohio State offense. If Will Howard can connect on a lot of big plays to Smith, Egbuka, and Tate, this offense can get going at a very high level. But it's all going to come from this offensive line as well. You have players that you want up front there, with Tate Ratledge back, Josh Simmons playing at a very high level. You have to rely on them. And it's not going to be an easy test to really try and win this football game. But ultimately, when I look at it, and when I look at how Tennessee matches up in the secondary, I have to think that Ohio State will be kind of foaming at the bit here, or chomping at the bit here to try and get those guys going, because I don't really think Tennessee's seen anything like it, to be honest with you, in terms of who they've had to defend this year. And ultimately, not for nothing, I do feel like Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are not just going to sit and stare at Will Howard throw the football 40 times. They are a big part of this too. When I talk about transfers, them coming here and wanting to win a championship here is a big part, because Travion Henderson would have had a great season otherwise, but because of Quinshon Judkins, he's really stepped up his game as well. And ultimately, it's going to come down to them really being X factors here. And I do think that if they get going, then potentially no one on that side of the bracket can stop them. Because I feel like if they win this matchup and they face Oregon again, and Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are firing on all cylinders, then good luck to Oregon. Because that's how potent this team can be when every single level of that offense is clicking. But the reason why I'm a little bit apprehensive here in terms of ultimately saying that Ohio State blows the doors off Tennessee is because of that defensive run. That's the one matchup where Tennessee can make all the weapons on Ohio State's offense a moot point. Because if James Pierce gets to you and you're Will Howard, chances are you're going to revert back to the Will Howard who makes mistakes. Chances are you're not going to look as dominant as you had with all these weapons. That's the key here. If Will Howard faces pressure, pressure's going to mount on him. And ultimately, in the 2 games where they've lost this season, pressure got the better of him. And so that's going to be the thing that could help Tennessee win this football game. And I do believe that at the end of the day, when it comes down to predictions, Tennessee either covers the spread because of that defense or wins outright. And so I'm looking at this game a lot more closely than people think in terms of talent gap. And I think that if James Pierce Jr. is the star of this game, it can be closed rather quickly, and it could see Ohio State in another very disappointing season on a whimper. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below, because that will just about do it for today's show. I've been Christopher Shepard of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always with the GSMC Sports Network. You know what to do. Like, follow, and subscribe. Make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. But other than that, I will see you on Friday. Again, weird holiday schedule. Happy holidays to you all if you don't watch the show until then. But other than that, I am out for today.